I've been in Nashville 27 years. Been wearing a lot of hats. First thing I was doing was live sound when I came to town. I graduated with a degree in music from a little fine arts college in Illinois called Millikan. I studied composition and arranging and those kinds of things, but I had a little studio. I fell in love with it, and I thought that was kind of be my calling. So I moved to town just to mix and record great music. And over time, I found myself in the production chair, just sort of indirectly it happened, and I found that I had a gift for that. And ironically, years later, I found myself in the writing chair again, which is kind of where I started with this whole arc. So I'd spent all these years refining engineering and production skills, and then within the last 3 or 4 years, it's gone back to writing with my artists and sort of kind of being a combination of a lot of things in the room. When I first came to town, the first thing I did was I toured. I wanted to be in the studio, but the money dictated a road gig, which grew into another road gig, which grew into another road gig, and pretty soon I found myself touring and making pretty good money on the road. And I was very picky about the room tuning, we'll say. So when you fly the PA or when you stack the PA on each side of the stage and how the system was set up, I was very adamant about having access to crossover points and delay times, et cetera, et cetera. And I would come in, and this is before I was even using Smart or there was a product that Meyer Sound had called Sim, which we were using prior to Smart, actually. And I was going in and doing it by ear and tapping microphones and getting things as close as I could. And then I finally got trained in Sim, and I was able to start learning about the aspects of aligning systems and drivers within cabinets. And the BSS Omni Drive stuff came out early on, and it was like a godsend for EAW 850 cabinets. Like, now we can make them actually sound good because they're time aligned and phase aligned. And so I was doing that. And so when I finally had a chance to start getting into the studio, I was working in all these rooms around town, and I walk in, and the first thing I did was an engineer that I interned with, his name was Brett Teagarden. He carried a pair of KRKs with him everywhere. And I was always like, why do you carry your own monitor? He's like, well, I'm familiar with them. Well, I noticed even then, with a lack of experience in the studio world, that every control room sounded different. Like, there was no, even with his KRKs, it didn't sound the same. And I'm like, I know you're familiar with the monitors, but how is that working with your ears? And so I decided that whenever I had a chance to first engineer, that I would find a way that I could be more consistent with my monitoring environment. I'd always wanted a system that could manipulate phase. And so I saw Trinnov years ago, and I was like, this could work for me. But it wasn't until the ST2 stuff came out, and I think I have one of the earliest ones, I was like, I gotta try this. And it was a little janky at first for me to understand how to get into it and understand what the settings were. And as I got into the system, I started getting better and better results. So now what I do is when I go to another room, I take the Trinnov with me, and it's a new room. I put the mic up. I already have my preset curve that I like to listen to. I hit go, and in a few minutes, I'm good to go. I don't have to go the night before for 4 or 5 hours. And what's brilliant is it not only does the EQ curve, but it manipulates the phase in a way that all of those holes that I had to compensate for with EQ that would affect another spot in the room that wasn't the listening position are much smoother. And once I got to know the system, and I could do the couch, I could do behind the rack, behind the console where the stools usually sit in a lot of these studios, then I was able to do multiple positions. So when we do playback, I just reach over, hit a button, and the client would be sitting at the stools at the rack behind me, and I could hit it. And the compliments you get on the control room mix just are worth the extra effort to me. And I see why when they're using $1,000 pair of monitors, like why do I spend $5,000 on room correction? Okay, I get that, but at what level do you want to work at? What level do you want to compete at? And hey, I know guys will argue all kinds of things, but my method is source and monitoring are the two #1 things. The microphone that I use on the source and what I listen to listen to that microphone. If those two things aren't spot on, then everything else I have in my chain doesn't matter. And that's my opinion for what it's worth. You know, I could have an average mic pre with a great microphone and reverse that idea, give me a crappy microphone with an amazing mic pre, it's not gonna sound as good. An average set of speakers versus a great set of speakers, I'm not gonna be able to tell what's going on as well. So my method has always been source and monitor. And it was that way when I toured, and I carried that into the world that I do now when I make records. And everything else in between is fluff. Probably the biggest compliment I get from anybody when I deliver a project is, how do you make everything so clear and how can we hear every instrument so well? And A, that's my taste, right? B, being able to hear everything allows me to put it in a space so that you can hear it, you know, on your system that way. And it really works. Like, you know, I could go into a whole nother conversation about clocking and things. There have been devices over the years that I've just knew I wouldn't need. And then I tried it and I'm like, I'm gonna have to spend the money, like begrudgingly. And I guarantee you, if people used this system and found their sweet spot, they would never go back to the other way.